Mysteries of History Revealed, Dinosaurs to Extraterrestrials, copyright Jeremy Auldaney, 2014, all rights reserved. And we're starting on page 63. This report was on, and this is number 11 in this series of audio books, or book. This report was on Chicxulubmeteorite.com, published on the internet with no identification of the author on January 29, 2006. This website no longer exists. Quote, a rock sample has been found that has been deemed a fragment of the original meteor responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs. It's a unique impact melt from Chicxulub composed of terrestrial carbonates and andesites, as well as greater than 10% of the original chondrite meteor. The rock itself has been determined to be a melt bomb ejected from the initial impact event of Chicxulub. Note, author's note, similar to tektites and the fragments I discovered in Texas. Continuing, it has been theorized that moments after the impact, the energy ejected material into low Earth orbit, where it has been preserved until orbital decay caused it to fall back to Earth. As such, this material is considered an Earth meteorite containing a large portion of the original meteor, which was previously thought to have been vaporized on impact. The presence of an extraterrestrial component is significant, for drill cores taken from the Chicxulub show only trace evidence of the original bolide, much less than 1%. The rock contains many rare minerals, which includes larnite, magnesowisite, etc. Larnite is an unusual calcium silicate, equivalent to the calcium end member of olivine. Magnesiowisite is an extremely high-pressure iron mineral, thought to be found deep within the Earth's mantle. If you would like more information, then I invite you to read an online scientific manuscript presented as a master's thesis. End quote. This manuscript cannot be found, but notice, these are the same elements I found near Glen Rose, Texas. Dr. Carl Baugh told me the fragments I found could be fragments from the Chicxulub crater. It has not been confirmed, but it is believed the asteroid was iron, olivine, and chondrite, and that it was only a fragment of the original asteroid that hit Yucatan Peninsula. I believe that there were multiple impacts just like the one on Jupiter in 1994. I believe I told you that this is starting on page 63. It is possible the Chicxulub impactor was a carbonaceous chondrite containing iron and olivine. I believe all types of meteorites, asteroids, and comets are from a similar source. Articles and adventures, meteorite hunting, Franconia science on website aerolite.org. There is no town of Franconia, Arizona, only an exit ramp from the highway, from Highway 40. His first catch of the day is a small, moderately weathered black chondrite. It has been slightly buried in the sandy flats north of Interstate 40. Perfect and beautifully oriented, a 26-gram iron meteorite sitting in the desert pavement. And that's the reference. This article describes the discovery of a strewn field composed of carbonaceous chondrites and iron meteorites, showing they are from the same source scattered over an area. Comets do not produce impacts. They leave trails of meteoroids in their path, which are so broken down into small rocks as they go around the sun, which never hit the ground. Only large, solid meteoroids with less volatile material reach the ground or produce craters. Because the volatile material, of course, causes it to explode, like if it has ice in it. It could have water in it, or other things that could explode and turn into liquid and explode, and then when they turn into gas. Secular scientists tell people these impacts were millions of years ago, but true science in the Bible indicates they were only thousands of years ago when a swarm of large meteorites struck the Earth and the planets. Today, everyone agrees that there were worldwide catastrophes in the ancient past. However, those with different beliefs, as explained above, explain it differently and date it or them differently. The atheists and spiritualists claim there were several catastrophes over millions of years. Christians claim it was mainly one major catastrophe about 5,000 years ago, the flood of Noah. Actually, it's less than 5,000. Some people date it almost about 4,500 or so. I've always hung to the date of 5,000 because we don't know precisely the date of the flood. Well, we know fairly close, but it's really irrelevant, 500 years, give or take. No major cataclysms, according to Lyell. Not too long ago, Darwinian atheists claimed that there were no worldwide cataclysms, since Charles Lyell published his Principles of Geology, and Charles Darwin founded his theory on it. Did you know that Albert Einstein was deluded by those when he was 12 years old? He was fooled into believing in evolution, and so he rejected the Bible as myth, just like a lot of other people. And yet they call him a genius. He wasn't much of a genius because he certainly didn't believe his Bible. And that's where wisdom actually starts. And without it, you become a fool. But like many evolutionary ideas, this was found to be false and had to be revised when new evidence of an asteroid-comet impact left evidence in an iridium layer at the top of the Mesozoic Cretaceous strata, the KT boundary above dinosaur deposits, or should I say the last of the dinosaur deposits. Authors note, I said strata above, not era or period, because geologic periods or eras are only theoretical assumptions, and we want to seek the truth, not speculation. The fact is, the Cretaceous, Jurassic, etc. are not periods of time today, scientifically speaking, and we can only observe what we can see today, but rather are rock layers with certain kinds of fossils in them which have to be interpreted. And there is more than one explanation for the origin of these layers. Warning, do not use the preconceived conclusions if you have to avoid preconceived conclusions if you were to find the truth. Blast from the past. When spiritualist and theistic evolutionist Immanuel Velikovsky, a Russian Jewish psychiatrist and independent scholar, published his book Earth in Upheaval, the atheistic Darwinian scientific establishment went berserk, accusing him of being an amateur, non-scientist crackpot. However, this was before they began to see merit in what he said when the Alvarez hypothesis became acceptable to mainstream evolutionists. In other words, they were forced into it by the evidence. They never accept anything, even if it's true, unless they're forced into it, away from their atheistic interpretations, so that they don't have to believe the Bible, is at the point. Here's what Wikipedia has to say. Quote, Alvarez hypothesis posts that mass extinction of the dinosaurs and many other living things was caused by the impact of a large asteroid on the Earth 65 million years ago, called the Cretaceous Paleogene Extinction Event, or KT boundary. Cretaceous Tertiary. That's what KT stands for. Evidence indicates that the asteroid fell in the Yucatan Peninsula at Chicxulub, pronounced Chicxulub, Mexico. The hypothesis is named after the father and son team of scientists who were physicists Luis and Walter Alvarez, who first suggested it in 1980 after making several discoveries. In March 2010, an international panel of scientists endorsed the asteroid hypothesis, specifically Chicxulub impact, as being the cause of the extinction. A team of 41 scientists reviewed 20 years of scientific literature, and so doing also ruled out other theories such as massive volcanism. They determined that a 10 to 15 kilometer, that's 6 to 9 miles, space rock hurtled into the Earth at Chicxulub. The rock's size could be approximately the entire size of the Martian moon Deimos. There's a radius of 6.2 kilometers. The collision would have released the same energy as 100 tetratons of TNT, which was 1 billion times the energy of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. End quote. We're also going to find that there's more than Chicxulub. There are several large craters, and I believe there's 1 or 2 that are actually larger than Chicxulub, and I'll show that they occurred at the same time. Satellites of Mars are carbonaceous asteroids. Technical papers by J.B. Pollock, Planetary Satellites, A77-40972, 19-91. Tucson University of Arizona Press, 1977, pages 319 to 344. Discussion on page 344 and 345. NASA-supported research tells us about Phobos and Deimos. Quote, and this is the reference I'm giving. Photometric measurements suggest that they are made of either carbonaceous chondritic material or basalt. In other words, they're volcanic, if it's basalt. Sinclair, 1972, Bourne and Duxbury, 1975, and Shore, S-H-O-R, 1975. This technical paper confirms these satellites of Mars are made of the same common stony material that made up the asteroid that created the KT boundary, as well as the 1908 meteorite that exploded in the air above Tunguska Wilderness in Siberia. And stony chondrites are the most common meteoroids in space, but fewer of them reach the ground compared to the rare irons. Tunguska meteorite of 1908. The giant Siberian explosion at 7:14 a.m. on June 30th, 1908, shook central Siberia. Witnesses describe seeing a fireball in the sky as bright and hot as the sun. Millions of trees fell to the ground when the ground shook. Several scientists investigated years later in 1920. But for many decades it remained a mystery as to what caused the explosion. When I read a book about it, they came to the conclusion it was produced by, they discovered that it was produced rare elements found in the KT boundary, is what I noticed, and was therefore a carbonaceous chondrite. That was what I realized when I read the book. I said, that's the same material that they're finding in the KT boundary. I was the first to notice that. Now, as far as I know, nobody had said that before. So why did it remain a mystery? Was it because they knew it would confirm that there had been an impact that could have caused the extinction at the KT boundary, which they didn't want to accept? The Siberian impact is estimated to have been 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. However, if the blast was caused by a carbonaceous chondrite comet or meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere, they realized that it posed a lethal threat in the future. So they worried about it, but they didn't want the public to know, because it would go against the theory, it would undermine the theory of evolution in millions of years. My paraphrase: the interesting thing about the 1908 Tunguska event is it exploded in the air and left only meteorite dust, rare elements not commonly found on Earth, along with glass spherules. This is what they found. Tiny glass tektites. Some local geochemical anomalies were discovered at the epicenter of the Tunguska explosion. Substantial shifts in isotopic compositions of carbon, hydrogen, lead, cobalt, copper, titanium, and other elements were found. This is Dmitriev, he's a Russian, and Zuralev, 1984, and Vasilev in 1995. Society for Scientific Exploration from the Edge of Science tells us, quote, The soil is also enriched with rare earths, samarium, europium, terbium, ytterbium, gadolinium, etc., as well as with barium. You know, rare earths are used for television screens, and out there at Mountain Pass, just before you get to Nevada, where the dinosaur tracks are in California, across the road on the other direction, there's limestone on one side and there's a gold mine on the other, the Coliseum gold mine. But right there near the road is a rare earth mine, and I think it's the only one in this part of the world. And it's very valuable because they need them for electronic devices. Above, as quoted in Edge of Science, number 5, October-December 2010, a publication of the Society for Scientific Exploration. Here's their magazine statement of purpose. Edge of Science is a quarterly magazine. Print copies are available from the edgeofscience.magcloud.com. For further information, see edgescience.org. Email edgescience@gmail.com. Why Edge Science? Because contrary to public perception, scientific knowledge is still full of unknowns. What remains is to be discovered. What we don't know very likely dwarfs what we do know, and what we think we know may not be entirely correct or fully understood. Anomalies, which researchers tend to sweep under the rug, should be actively pursued as clues to potential breakthroughs and new directions in science, end quote. Great, that's absolutely great. In fact, I used to call myself a nomalologist, or I named my magazine Anomalology. I also called it mysteryology, which is a more common term for the same idea as a mysteryologist, or omniologist, as Joe Taylor calls it, which is another version of it. I agree. This is why I wrote this book. Journal of Geophysical Research, Volume 68, Issue 3, pages 911 to 917. 1st February 1963 confirms these are rare earth elements found in meteorites, proving the Tunguska 1908 event was a meteorite, but still doesn't explain why no one for a long time would not accept this explanation. One Russian theory claimed it was an alien spaceship that changed direction, and then, of course, the dust found there from meteorite would refute that idea. Meteor crater, classic example of bias. Meteor crater is a classic example of this situation of evolutionary bias. When fact opposes theory, facts are rejected. Professor Harmon Leroy Fairchild was the first to research the Arizona meteorite impact area and found iron meteorites all over the ground, but the scientific community ridiculed his conclusion, so he gave in to the ridicule because it didn't fit Charles Lyell's uniformitarian theory of evolution, and accepted the volcanic explosion hypothesis. Fairchild's original results were published in Science, which caused an uproar. It was almost 100 years before the evolutionists would admit the obvious truth. This is the normal course of scientific progress. Usually it's a single amateur researcher that turns out to be right, who goes against the majority. I will continue this in our next recording, and we're ending on page 68.